to the cloud.
Okay, it's going.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Today is a new episode of SIG VMware. This is the bi-weekly call we have every other week on Thursday. Today is September the 27th, 2018, and we're going to get started with the community updates from Stephen. Take it away.
Okay. We'll start with the first thing coming up in the community category, and that's KubeCon China. It starts in mid-November. The SIG itself has a couple sessions there. One is an intro session to the cloud provider, and then the other one is a deeper dive. I think I messed up those notes a little bit because the intro is going to be the labeling in zones, and the deeper dive is utilizing vSphere features to your advantage when you deploy Kubernetes on vSphere. So the links are in the doc if you want to see more and the exact times. There's also going to be a full day VMware hands-on workshop pre-event at KubeCon China. There's a lot of other sessions that are related in different ways to, but in reality, the whole of KubeCon is related to the SIG. So go to the link there if you're going to be there. Those same sessions with slightly different speakers will be presented at KubeCon Seattle as well. And I believe that the VMware workshop is also going to be in Seattle. For those on the call who are developers, and I think this applies to a lot of you, there is going to be a contributor summit pre-event taking place in Seattle. They're still making plans for the exact agenda on that, but I've been to a couple of those, and I'd strongly encourage anybody on this call who's a developer to make plans to go to that contributor summit. I've been getting a lot out of it. It's more developer talks and social interaction. Finally, in community, this is a little self-serving, but it's too late to propose to speak at either of the KubeCons now, but there's a big open source conference coming up in March in Los Angeles where I live, and I'm the program chair for the container track and an additional container day they have there. It's 4 days long. It's the biggest open source conference in North America, and it's open for all talks on Kubernetes, open source, open data. The link is there. Back to you, Fabio, to cover the active projects.
Sure. Just want to point out one thing that I gathered from the community meeting right before this one. There will be a contributor summit at Seattle as well.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I don't think there is one in Shanghai.
No, there's actually one in Shanghai for new contributors only. It's not going to be usually okay. When the contributor summit is split in two tracks. One is for new contributors, and the other one is for existing contributors. Shanghai will only have the new contributors track. Seattle will have both. When you sign up for Seattle, you're going to see that there's a wait list for the contributor summit. Paris Pittman from Google said that they have some scheduling problem or some sort of problems on that, but they're going to resolve that. Apparently, there's no risk of be let out of the contributor summit. Just make sure you sign up and you put the tick on the contributor summit when you sign up for KubeCon, and we'll make sure that we'll be able to access the contributor summit during I think it's on the very first day of KubeCon. So
yeah, in fact, I think that they've been mentioning that there might be a social and dinner even the night before that first day for people who get there that early.
Yeah, which is very helpful for people flying internationally. So we don't.
Yeah, I suppose you're going to get there. You might be tired, but you probably have to eat dinner anyway.
Exactly, which is better than dining by yourself at the hotel restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I know, having been at that Washington State Convention Center, compared to the number they expect to get there, I'm guessing that they have a lot of problems with the facility being big enough to hold this thing.
Yeah, possibly. I've never been there actually. So yeah, we'll see. Let's move on the active projects update. So we have, our usual three major initiatives right now: cloud provider cluster API, and we're getting started on the CSI plugin as well. Let's start with the cloud provider first. So we mentioned this many times before on these calls. We started working on this external cloud provider, starting pretty much with the 1.12 release cycle. We got to a point where we have a working cloud controlling manager, and this cloud controlling manager is now being tested as well. So we have a CI working. I'm going to ask Hui or Andrew to give an update specifically on that. But let me just say that we reached a point where we managed to fulfill all the the expectations that we had coming from SIG Cloud Provider, which is the SIG that is kind of looking at the overarching cloud provider work across all the cloud providers. So we have conformance tests, we have tests happening on pull request at every pull request. We're actually starting to get people from outside VMware and outside, I would say the usual suspects from SIG Cloud Provider to start contributing to the repo. I actually just approved merged one PR like right before this call. So we're starting to get more and more involvement from the community on it. We expect to have a tagged version of this. So right now we do have YAML files, and we have the artifacts pushed automatically on a GCS bucket, on a GCR bucket. So people can start consuming CCM right away just by applying the YAML file that is in the repo. We will be working on tagging a release at some point, maybe 1.0. So we can start having tag releases in the CCM as well. That has not happened yet, but it will happen probably before the end of the week or next week at the latest, I guess.
Fabio, I don't know if you're looking at the document while you're talking here, but I think maybe Andrew and we jumped in there with a comment saying they might want to give an update here.
Yeah. I'm actually giving Hui. I see Hui. I don't know if Andrew is here, but Hui, you want to give an update on the CI? There's been a lot of work on that.
Yeah, Andrew, I think Andrew is on appointments, so I'm going to give updates here. Yes, we hit a milestone yesterday, basically, for the CI/CD for cloud provider. So for now, both in-tree provider and out-of-tree cloud provider, we are running conformance tests. Their cron job setting up are run every day to run against the head of Kubernetes with the head of CCM. And also we run the head of CCM with 3 different branches of release, 1.10, 1.11, and 1.12. So the link I shared here, you can see is the test grid going to check it out. The results going to be posted on the test grid, and anything if you open that, anything start with vSphere cloud provider means the CCM, the cloud provider vSphere out of tree, and you can run. You can see we run master 1.10, 1.11, and 1.12. And anything just vSphere means the in-tree provider we have, and we run the test also. And for now, things are pretty good. We are green in most cases, and there's a minor issue on the 1.10 with in-tree provider, and we're going to fix that soon. Also, we are forming a plan to how to sustain actively triaging those tests and fix the issue along the way. And stay tuned for that. We are definitely going to have a plan for that. And also, like Fabio said, we set up the Traverse CI to build the CCM automatically for every merge, and the image going to be available on the GCS. with that, I'm going to turn over to Fabio.
Awesome. Thanks. This is a very interesting. This is actually something we always wanted to have at some point. This is all running on real vSphere infrastructure. We have a cluster, a pretty big cluster running on what we call the vSphere on AWS, which is sort of running conformance tests on real hardware. So we're pretty excited about this milestone. So this is going to be a foundational piece for everything coming, next. So we're pretty stoked about it.
Fabio?
Yes.
Hey, is there a feature tracking spreadsheet where we compare which features already made it into the external cloud provider and which are pending?
No, not yet. Actually, right now,
we have that spreadsheet, but I don't know that it's being updated with that. But
I think Michael is referring to something more specific to just the cloud provider.
Okay.
Right now, I can tell you that we're pretty much in the same. We have pretty much one-to-one feature parity. The only thing that is excluded right now from the external cloud provider, which we're working on, is the zone support.
Oh, okay. Because I was missing that one actually when I
Yeah,
checked. Good.
it is.
Okay, that's good. Good to know.
Zone support is missing for. We're actually looking into implementing it. We called it a stretch goal for this release just because we weren't sure we will be able to have it merged in tree and then have enough
Yes.
time to port it out of tree.
Makes sense. I just wanted to know
it
whether
does sound like that spreadsheet would be a good idea to compose, though.
You're right. I'm guilty of not keeping track of this change. But it's actually a good thing to start working on it. I'll take an action of creating a spreadsheet to make sure that we track not just the cloud provider feature, but also
Yeah, either take it or assign it to me. You take your pick.
Every feature that we have in tree, and we're
Yes.
mapping to external providers.
I'll come back to this point later when we talk about the storage stuff.
Awesome. Cluster API. Do we have Loke on the call? Let me see. We don't have Loke.
No, I don't see him.
See if I can ping him if he's around.
You want to move to the next one and see if maybe.
Yeah, let's move to the next one. Let's just ping him real quick. CSI. Do we have Travis on the call
Yeah, he's
here?
on the call.
I am here this time around. SIG architecture was canceled, so you get to see my face today.
Awesome. Can you give us like a quick update on the work on CSI?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I've kind of completed gathering requirements and figure out where we're going to go with it. As you know, there's already a CSI folder within the cloud provider package in GitHub, and I'm about ready to submit a pull request to that, hopefully tomorrow, that has kind of a scaffold for that plugin that does not include vSphere specific implementation yet, but it'll be a start for getting us going and building, or hopefully building CI around it and having that in early and adding tests. And that's really where it is right now. But development's about to pick up on it very heavily because that's my number one task now.
Awesome. Thanks, Travis.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have a plan of bringing all these efforts together into some shape or form by KubeCon in Seattle. So hopefully we're going to have I would say a major milestone in all three initiatives by the time that KubeCon Seattle comes around. Okay, we're gonna wait for Luke to join. Maybe he's gonna show up. I think he had some appointment he had to make. Let's move on to the discussion.
Fabio, if you want, I can actually provide some update on the cluster API.
Oh,
side.
awesome, Sudhar. I didn't see you on the call. Awesome. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sure. So on the cluster API side, one of the main things that we're working on at the moment is the Govimami translation, moving away from Terraform. At least in my own personal fork of the cluster API, I have some bit of code wherein we've gotten some bit of closer parity to Terraform implementation. But again, that's still kind of work in progress at the moment. I'm trying to finish up or clean up some of that implementation, and hopefully I'll be able to create a pull request on the main repo, which will at least have a Go vMami based implementation alongside with the Terraform. So the idea is we're not going to switch, not using like directly going to the Go vMami by default, but at least it will be, the implementation will be pushed in a way that if someone wants to try it out, they can like quickly just modify, maybe, an easy way to switch from Terraform to Go vMami and just try out the implementation and see if it works or not, and figure out issues on that. Yeah, that's essentially the plan at the moment.
Awesome. Siddharth, do you guys have any specific need, or you need some type of expertise, or you have some outstanding issues that you could use some help with, or is it everything just a matter of time?
No, I'm sure there's a lot of things that can use help. I think from the last, if I remember correctly, Locke outlined in our last cluster API vSphere provider meeting, Locke outlined like a few issues. I don't have them handy at the moment, but that he kind of asked for general help from anybody who wants to help, and that will be a good start. So, I mean, I think one of the things we've been doing is we've been trying to keep creating the number of issues on that on our GitHub repo there with the things that we're working on and things that we intend to work on. So again, if anybody is willing to help, and I think that'll be great. But unfortunately, I don't have a particular link that I can share here at the moment.
Awesome. I just want to remind everybody, if you guys are interested in any of these efforts, we do have specific calls for them. All of them are on the same schedule as SIG VMware, so they're every other week. So bi-weekly calls. Cluster API is on Monday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, which would be 10 p.m. Central European time. We have a call for cloud provider as well. It's a 30-minute call. It's on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, which is 6 p.m. Central European. If you're interested, please join. They're on the Kubernetes community calendar. They're out there. Just show up if you're interested in working or just learning more about what we're doing on these two efforts. We're probably going to have at some point a special CSI call as well. But right now we have these 3 meetings, so please feel free to jump in if you'd like to hear more about these efforts. With that said, we can move on to the discussion phase. So Michael, I know you have a bunch of things on the agenda. You want to kick off?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it short. So the first one, the status update on the dynamic volume creation and multi-AZ deployments. This is basically an issue that we already discussed in the last call, so just briefly for those who didn't attend. So right now we have with the VCP, with the in-tree VCP, we have that issue that if you want to deploy Kubernetes in a multi-AZ deployment, so that it's typically being backed by separate vSphere clusters, then this requires shared storage amongst all the vSphere hosts being like forming this Kubernetes cluster. And I had a call this week with some of the engineers, the VMware engineers who implemented that functionality by the time. And we were going through the proposal that I made, and that's all of the stuff is described in the issue there. And it looks like we get this kind of prioritized. But there's no timeline commitment yet, but it looks like there is interest, and it will be prioritized by the engineers. So the question, Fabio, I have is, first of all, how should we sync that and align that with the out of tree in order to not, first of all, duplicate efforts, or maybe we'll just focus on out of tree, but then there's CSI and things will move away from the out of tree into maybe a separate plugin, etc. So I'm not really aware of, or let me put the question different. How should we implement that feature? Should we focus on in-tree or not focus on in-tree anymore?
So ideally, so here's the criteria for this. So we we have to consider anything that is right now in tree as maybe not frozen completely, but as frozen as we can possibly think of it. So there's no major change that has to go into in tree. And major changes will be rejected by the review process. So we're trying to keep things, as minimal as possible, which means bug fixes, obviously, security fixes, all of them. Maybe introducing minor changes is fine. Like adding zone support is fine. The major refactor where we go and touch more APIs, especially if we create more dependencies on APIs that are not supposed to be used from within the cloud provider interface. I know there has been some problems around that, not necessarily from VMware, but for other cloud providers that were using API calls that we're not supposed to be using, which makes extracting the cloud providers more difficult because we have all these dependencies that we have to break. There's a working group actually being formed around this specific issue, which is the cloud provider extraction. Unfortunately, it collides with this very call, so it is actually going on right now. They're trying to move it to a different time slot, and will probably be made an official working group very soon, probably in the next few weeks. This goes back to the fact that the Kubernetes project wants to get rid of all of the vendor-dependent code inside KK. So at some point, access to those files will be, possibly completely, frozen or just for, major security bugs. So we have to work out of tree. That doesn't mean that we cannot make small incremental changes in the code base that is in tree. So if we're talking about making major changes or adding new feature that requires a lot of code, then we have to look at out of tree, which means CSI, which means cloud provider, depending on what type of feature we're talking about. If we're talking about making improvements, making small improvements on an existing feature, adding support for multi-AZ in the storage creation process, which basically already exists in some shape or form inside Intree, then I think it's something that we can do Intree and port over or work on at the same time on the out of tree version of it. This is because most of the time, well, sometimes, not most of the time, sometimes the actual interface that you're gonna have to use is different between in-tree and out-of-tree. So you cannot just,
Yes.
So let me ask you this, Michael, for storage that's usable across these AZs, if someone, I grant that it's perhaps suboptimal, but if somebody was to use NFS, for example, that probably works now across these zones without needing any code changes, or I'm guessing it does. And maybe it would just be a documentation issue. But if we're talking about getting more complex storage like vSAN to work, it's a bigger issue, right?
Yeah, so we currently employ workarounds for that. For example, you can work around with static volume provisioning or any type of shared data store, be it a like stretched vPlex or NFS. But we do see users and also like customers of commercial Kubernetes distributions requiring that storage is dedicated per zone. So they're following like more a cloud model where storage should not be shared between zones for failure isolation. And so this currently prevents them from using dynamic volume provisioning. And the proposal that I made looks like it's more of a minor change. First of all, it's a bug fix. And second, it's a slight improvement based on the tagging API that we shipped with 1.12. But it depends on what the engineers will pick up or will come up with a plan if they consider this at all to be fixed. But I can tell you that's important because there's so many calls that I have where this is an issue currently.
Hey, Michael, this is Sandeep here. Yes, we are looking into the issue that you mentioned. We will get back to you about the rough estimates about this. And as Fabio was saying, if this ends up being a really big change, then maybe we should consider putting it in out of tree.
Makes sense.
Otherwise, maybe just do it in the in tree.
Cool. Thanks, Sandeep.
Okay. Yeah.
So just to refresh on the well, at least the expected timelines that we're trying to push with SIG Cloud Provider. Ideally, we want to have everybody to have an out of tree equivalent by 114, which means that everybody should have an out of tree cloud provider and potentially an out of tree CSI provider too. I know that we are kind of a special case because the storage provider entry and the cloud provider entry are very much the same code base. So we're moving, I would say, one single big piece of code into two smaller discrete components. So most of the other cloud providers have like separate code bases for the storage implementation and the cloud provider implementation. But going back to the timelines, everybody in the Kubernetes community, at least people involved in the SIG Cloud Provider, they expect to have something working by 114 out of tree. By 114, the external cloud provider will be GA, or possibly even before 114. They're actually talking about doing it for 113, but that really depends on the work of the working group in defining the binaries and the timelines and when we actually will declare the internal cloud providers obsolete. So the code will still be there even when the deprecation happens. So at some point, the in-tree code base for cloud providers will be deprecated. And the deprecation mark is basically saying this code will stay there for a year inside the Kubernetes code base and then it will be removed. People are trying to speed up the removal process. So for example, OpenStack is removing their code from in-tree and they're scheduling the PR to be cherry-picked for 113. So by 113, OpenStack will not have the code inside Kubernetes anymore. We're not planning to have such aggressive schedule, but they're setting an example and the expectation is there. So we'll need to align with everybody else on this.
Makes sense. Thank you. And the second sub-bullet basically was about, this is still to the multi-AC, but going back to what you said, Fabio, on the matrix, like feature tracking matrix, since the out of tree probably will be kind of split between several sub-features and components, can we consider like this in the tracking sheet, for example, saying the external CCM supports this in itself, or this is an external feature, for example, it's storage related, and then it links to another repository for CSI implementation or something else. Just because it's right now it's easy. You look into the VCP code and everything is there, and as soon as we're starting breaking this up, it's a little bit more complex for operators and also developers, I think.
No, your comment makes a lot of sense. I think we need a tracking sheet that maps the current CCM interface and the current storage interface, and basically maps those calls into, hey, this is fulfilled by, in-tree is fulfilled by, this code. Out of tree is being fulfilled by, I don't know, the CSI plugin or the CCM plugin.
Yeah, that would be good.
Makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Yeah, I think, by the way, this isn't just code, but the docs as well. So once we get the CSI out there, conceivably that might get used by things completely outside Kubernetes and needs to reside in its separate area independent of Kubernetes.
Cool. Coming to the next one, and this I'm keeping this short because I want to keep time for Kenny's question. This is just a question for maybe Hannes. He's still in the call.
Yep.
So Hannes, you probably already know what I'm looking for. So the question here is CFCR, so the former Kubo. is there any plans when it will pick up the new zone implementation that we ship with 1.12?
I don't really know. What I can tell you is I gave an update to CFCR when this PR was merged. Right now, the newest CFCR release, I think, is using Kubernetes 1.11.2.
Yeah.
So I don't know really what's going on there, but I will ask the CFCR people.
Cool.
And we'll update you and the document here.
Nice. Thank you.
Awesome. I was talking. I was on mute. Thanks a lot. I see that there's another item from Kenny. Kenny, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, going through the SIG release process now and understanding what it takes to bring on new features and enhancements, I don't want to say I'm concerned. I'm just making sure that, and this is kind of why I'm bringing it up for discussion, to figure out what should we look at as the right way to bring in new features or enhancements. And right now, this was to the latest was the native entry cloud provider because of the latest with zone support. And I say this because I had it on the KK issue there that this was not actually being tracked by SIG release. And Doug and I were kind of talking back and forth and figuring out, well, should it be, right? Because if we look at what happened to Azure on the other side of it, Azure was being tracked. They had a fully fledged out KEP that was done, as well as documentation that was all into it as part of this process. So I want to kind of have a consensus through the group to make sure that this is, once we start adding more things or start changing things or looking at phase 2 for zone support, what is this supposed to look like?
Yeah, I added the comment on the docs there too, Kenny. And I think maybe Kenny isn't being real. He's being too polite here, but I think I'll make a statement that I was trying to pick up on what the zones feature did and how it worked. And I expected to go find a KEP and some docs, and it wasn't there. And with other cloud providers, that appears to be how things have worked. So I think really we should aspire to doing this going forward when we take on new features, to start the new features with a KEP and provide at least a skeletal home for documentation as we go along too.
Yeah, if I can add to that, it's kind of a gray area because if you go through and look through some of the issues and features, there was one that was for the vSphere cloud provider, and it was someone from VMware that had opened it, and the response was, "This is a vSphere feature. You don't need to go through this process." And then even with the Azure issue, if you follow the whole thing in the middle of it, there's people saying, why are we even doing this? Like, this doesn't need to go through this process. And then someone said, well, we've gone this far, so, let's just finish it. So from what I've seen, because, the Kubernetes feature of zones has been there for a long time. So what we did was the vSphere specific implementation. So based on that feedback that I had seen before, it was not necessarily a requirement or expected that that implementation detail would have a KEP associated with it. But for everything else, I certainly agree. If we're doing something that's not vSphere specific and it's a new feature, then we should absolutely follow that process.
Yeah, I tend to agree that there's not a consensus that's overarching for Kubernetes in general of how that should land. Like I said, I just looked at what happened with Azure, and there's a lot of things that are built into there that are a lot more understanding of how this is implemented and how this is done, because I was trying to write this for the Kubernetes 1.12 blog post for us internally, And I was sort of scratching my head because I have no idea how this is actually being implemented or how you can use it, because there's nothing that's written down in regards to documentation other than the issue itself.
Let me add some feedback to this. Not maybe not this very specific issue with zones, but it was more like caps, and what will be the right process to go through when we want to add a new feature. So first of all, the cap process, like the process itself, is quite new, I will say. I myself created a few PRs and creating new caps, specifically for SIG VMware, when we got the cloud provider project started. There was no consensus in how to organize the caps, and the PR just stayed there for weeks without getting reviewed or moved forward because people were still trying to figure out how to manage the caps. Actually, now we have caps, separated per SIG, while before we just had a single directory with all the caps there. Even just tracking the number of the cap was difficult. At the time when, echoing what Doug said, this was mostly a gray area where this was not really considered a feature because it's not a feature of Kubernetes. It is actually just implementing an interface that has been there since since it was created, and we were just basically implementing it instead of deciding not to implement it. And we thought we didn't need to go through that process, also because it will slow down. There was, other factors involved, like we had an intern working on it. He had a specific time box, so he could do the work. And it is not excuse to not go through the right process. And I totally agree on the fact that we should build a cap whenever we have some substantial change that has to go into Kubernetes. But I think now the time is probably more appropriate to start doing it the right way than it was before when we started this. So I totally echo your sentiment of doing the cap whenever we have to build something substantial.
Well, let's take a step back. I mean, let's just presume that the cap wasn't appropriate for this because it wasn't a new feature. But I think it's fair for people like Kenny and me to say that there should be some place that's discoverable to find the background on these new things, whether they're features, bug fixes, enhancements, and we need to make sure that we put something somewhere, whether it's a cap or not. Maybe it's just docs shared with the working groups that do the activity, but I think we need to come up with a means to publish where people should start looking for this stuff, and the stuff needs to be there somewhere.
I think it is appropriate now if you want to, I would say, amend somehow what we've done with the zone feature, given that we have a phase 2 we have to start working on. We could, now that the cap process is more streamlined and it's actually, it can move forward, much faster than it was before. We could create a cap for phase 2 and, maybe doing a recap of what we've done in phase 1 and making sure that, it stays there. There's a document that outlines what we did before, what we're going to do in phase 2. So we're going to basically, amend our position on that. And I think it might be the best way forward. I mean, with SIG Cloud Provider, we've been doing a lot of caps in trying to, put some guidelines around how to remove code from the cloud provider and other things related to this extraction. And it's been working quite well because there's a single document that everybody can refer to, especially since there's a lot of different companies and vendors involved in this. But in our case, it would be more like some documenting, some document the design and document kind of like a PRD type of document that is in a specific place that people can look at and read whenever they want to learn more about that specific feature. So I will be supportive in doing it, in doing the cap for phase 2 for zone support.
Yeah, that's great. And the last two things, and really there are just other concerns that were about it. Is one, it helps with just visibility because I'm looking at the Kubernetes 112 doc that's getting ready to go out, and Azure virtual machine scale sets is like a highlighted thing, like one of the top 5 things that are being released in Kubernetes 112. Probably doesn't mean anything much to us inside of VMware, but it has this visibility with inside of a release, right? And so that just making sure that it has some visibility. Number 2, I guess it kind of falls in with the visibility, is just to make sure that when this does start and you're doing all this, that there is sort of just some design document, and perhaps there's somebody that's not involved with SIG VMware and they see this, and then maybe they see a glaring hole, or they want to help fix it along the way, or help with the design process too. And it's not just being done in a vacuum as well. Those are the only 2 other kind of comments I had about it. But again, appreciate you bringing this up and having a discussion about it.
No, and absolutely. I mean, and I was looking at the chat in the meantime. I see Doug has pointed out a few issues where we actually used to make the decision back then. I think both these comments were absolutely right at the time. From my point of view, I think the KEP process was initially thought as something that would be impactful across all Kubernetes, like changing the way, I don't know, pods behave, or something like very impactful across, the entire Kubernetes ecosystem. I think moving forward in the process, people realized that KEPs were more useful for just, even organizing smaller things, and things that were still impactful, but not just for things impactful across all Kubernetes, but also just into a specific SIG, or a specific, across a specific domain. In our case, I think, doing something like implementing zone support will be very impactful for what is concerned for SIG VMware, which would be a KEP that could live under SIG VMware, because now there's this hierarchy of KEPs under specific SIGs, which is the same thing we're doing for SIG Cloud Provider. So I think now it might be the right time to start working on KEPs whenever we do things that are impacting everything or most of the things that SIG VMware does. All right, cool. Thanks, Kenny, for bringing that up. That was actually something we talked about in very early SIG meetings, but things change, and it's great to bring them up and revisit them. I don't see anything else on the agenda, and we still have 15 minutes. Is there anybody who wants to bring something up for discussion?
Talking about the KEPs, I just look at the GitHub, the KEPs folder. There are a lot of the SIG folder there, but I don't see a SIG VMware folder there. Is something that we are going to create in the future?
We're going to create the folder whenever we create our first KEP that impacts only SIG VMware. This is exactly what I was referring to. Initially, the KEP folder was only one folder for everybody, and all the KEPs were hosted there. Then at some point they refactored that part of the repo, and they decided to assign KEPs to specific SIGs, and this is the current situation right now. So whenever we will create a KEP that will impact our SIG, it will be generated by SIG VMware. It will be stored under there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So I just posted, I was browsing while we were doing this about the actual Kubernetes community guidance on when you need a KEP and when you don't. And from the sounds of it, it says they're only required when the changes are, quote, wide-ranging and impact most of the project, where project means Kubernetes. So I think that this means that that maybe we didn't violate any standards by not having this KEP. But I think the point that Kenny makes is we still need to have some of this background guidance be discoverable and searchable. So if it isn't a KEP, maybe it's just some well-known location for Google Docs. But I think we need to have a place to keep stuff.
I think the KEP's still valid. I think, sometimes these, semantics are just, the way you want to look at that. The project might be the SIG or the project might be Kubernetes. I guess it depends on how you interpret that. And I agree that maybe the initial intent for what you just posted in the chat, it was actually meant to be impact on Kubernetes. But from the look of it, what I see in the repo, sometimes KEPs are created for things that are impactful just for the specific SIG. So my point is still the same as before. I think we could start using KEPs for things that are impactful inside the SIG.
Yeah, and I was just looking at the Azure KEPs, which are under the KEPs SIG Azure folder, and I think it makes sense because all the KEPs follow the same structure, and so it's probably easier for all of us if we just follow this approach and make it a VMware specific KEP. Makes sense, yeah.
Cool. All right. Anything else?
I have two more comments, but I had spoken enough. If anyone else wants to jump in. I do the Fabio. 1, 2, 3.
Just go and speak.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah,
the floor is yours.
Two things. I'm almost finished on a new blog post about like my experiences speaking, my first time speaking at KubeCon, and I'll think it will be worth sharing with the wider audience, especially for the newcomers in Shanghai, and then those in KubeCon US, because it seems to be that the community is pretty focused on bringing in new people and speaking at KubeCon. So, and it definitely for me it was a very interesting experience, and it was kind of totally different than any of the other talks that I did before. So I wrote some tips and useful thoughts.
I look forward to reading it. Is it a personal blog post, or are you going to put it on the Kubernetes site?
Oh, that's a very good question. So it's still in Markdown, so it's not posted anywhere. It's just kind of forming up. You think it could be useful for kids.io?
Sure. I think that people with the Kubernetes project, particularly Paris Bittman, would love it. And I don't think you'd have any trouble getting that accepted.
Cool. So if you could,
I mean, I kind of suspect you'll get more eyeballs on it publishing it on the Kubernetes site, but
that's for sure. And mostly it's for like all these tips that I wrote down. They really helped me to deliver one of my best presentations that I would personally think that I ever had done. So, and I think it could be beneficial for everyone. So if you can help me, like link me with Paris or.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good idea.
I'd like to review it too, if that's what you're asking.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great to have a review on it. And second is going back to what Kenny was asking. Would it make sense to write a short blog post on the zones implementation, like not the details on how it's been implemented, but how it works, like for end users?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would like that. In fact, I was going to try to do it, or maybe
let's do it together.
We're going to do it, or we can do it together.
Yeah, let's do it together because I'm a little bit busy these days. So, but we need to get it out. So.
Well, not only that, we have to do a KubeCon presentation on this anyway.
Oh, I remember.
So the work of doing both a presentation and a blog post, I think, is a lot less than doing. It doesn't double the effort because a lot.
No, you're right. You're right. Cool. It's a good idea. Yeah, I'll ping you on that one as well. Thanks.
Awesome. Good stuff. Yeah, blog posts and documentation are the things that we probably need the most right now.
And by the way, I told Fabio this, but I'm volunteering to work on documentation of the zones feature. That was a lot of where I ended up with sharing Kenny's feelings that I couldn't find stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
That documentation, but
yeah.
Hey guys, this is Miles from Tech Marketing in Sabu. I heard Fabio mentioned that we need more blog posts and that kind of thing about about this kind of stuff. Is there anything in particular you think there's a burning need for that I could take up the torch on?
Well,
there,
if you want
Go ahead.
guidance, I'd suggest go to the Kubernetes Slack, and we get questions about using Kubernetes on top of vSphere all the time over there. And
Okay.
some of the questions are definitely repetitive. So that would be a good way to come up with topics that might be worthy of coverage by blog posts.
Yeah, you know what a good point would be? The most common question or issue being brought up on Slack is how can I get kubeadm running on vSphere with the VCP configuration?
Okay.
Miles. That is a big one because even though Sandeep, I think, and Divian have updated some of the documentation, people were still following old guidance, old blog posts, outdated information. If we can have an updated version, that would be great.
Sure. So just do like a day zero thing to begin with.
Yes,
Yeah,
kubeadm.
just lead them down a path of some means of installing Kubernetes, because I think another common flavor is there are a ton of different installers for Kubernetes, and people seem to pick random ones and then have issues with them. And if
Yeah.
you could just align people, maybe a blog post just documenting well one method extremely well will cause people to get behind that. But one of the issues I see is that people don't know which of those to choose. And some of them are maintained better than others. Some of them are documented better than others. But I don't think we want to take on supporting a dozen different Kubernetes installers. So kubeadm is one of the ones that I believe is claimed to be de facto supported by the Kubernetes project itself. So that one seems reasonable.
Cool. Because I remember struggling with Kubernetes Anywhere that we had for a while, and it was only supported to like 1.6. I was trying to get it working with 1.9, and it just wasn't happening. So yeah, I've had that similar experience. Cool. That's good feedback. I'll take some of that.
Thanks, Miles.
Awesome. All right. Anyone else? Otherwise, I will give you 5 minutes back.
So this is the note writer here. I've written the notes, but if you guys, you should read your notes and rephrase this stuff if I've misrepresented you.
Okay,
Thanks,
thanks,
Dewal.
by the
That
way.
was
Those
great,
notes look
Dewal.
great.
Great notes, Dewal.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks, guys. Fabio, I'm sure I've left some sections for you to fill because you could help me out with that.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, there's all you took a lot of notes. That's great. It's awesome.
Thanks, guys.
All right. 5 minutes before the top of the hour, I will give you them back to you guys. Have a nice rest of the week. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you. Bye.
Okay.
Bye, folks.